Yang Bursuha Puan Azida Azmi, Registrar of the University Technology Mara, Puan Alfina Bakar, Chairman of the 19th International Conference of University Administrators, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for spending a little bit of time with me this morning. So, first I'm going to start with a little bit of an apology because I'm a mover, so I'm going to tend to move around. So if I'm moving too fast, my apologies. But what I hope to be able to do in the next 40... Can everybody hear me okay? Fabulous. So when I first arrived this morning, I said, please forgive me, but technology is not my best friend. The laptop worked okay, but the sound system, so forgive me for that. So what I hope to be able to do in the next 45 minutes is just share with you some of our thoughts in terms of talent management and how that's evolving, and some tools and some ideas perhaps for you to take away with you to see if you can apply in your organizations. But before I start, let me just give you a little bit of a background about the organization I work with. So Manpower Group is a US-based organization that specializes in workforce solutions, ranging from HR consulting to project management to full outsourcing. So some of the experiences and some of what I will share with you today is not just based on our clients that we support, but also based on personal experience within the organization itself. So if we take a look at what's happening in the world today, we're experiencing the highest level of disruption that we have in our lifetimes. The world is changing. Demographic changes are driving work to move from typically where there are skills available to areas where there is work but there is no skills. In certain areas there are skills where there is no work. So how work is being executed is being consistently disrupted. Technology, as we're all aware, is becoming more and more pervasive in everything that we do. There's an awful lot of talk about how robotics are going to intrude into the day-to-day work, how we actually execute the work. And that in itself is going to drive some significant changes in terms of the type of workforces that we have to manage and the level of complexity that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. In my own organization, we have 5 generations in the workforce. And these 5 generations have vastly different experiences, different expectations from leadership. So what we are demanding of our HR communities, what we're demanding from our leadership is becoming far more complex than it ever has in being able to manage workforces that are working for longer than they have used to, workforce that is relatively mobile. So typically when I started work, everybody you worked with, you could walk around the office and see everybody that you're working with. Today, in our own organization, 1/3 of our workforce does not actually operate out of the office. They will operate either on a part-time basis or remote, or in some areas, not even in the country. So we're having to deal with that level of complexity in terms of how do we drive and motivate our workforce. The things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis in the IR 4.0 is, as we've said, changing demographics, things that we have little control over. We have an aging population in many countries, and in particular places like Europe, in Japan, you have a workforce that's becoming older and not enough young people coming through to be able to replace people going out of the workforce. So there is an increasing demand for skill sets and less people able to do it. In places like Australia, there is a projected shortage in basic trades. So for example, bricklayers, carpenters are going out of the business. These are seen as dated skill sets. And without those skill sets being passed on, there's going to come a situation where there are insufficient people to be able to grow the infrastructure. So it's not just about skills at the top end of the scale, where we're looking at people with technological experiences or very, very specialized cases. It's right across the board. And during our annual survey, when we look at the top 10 positions that are most in demand, within the top 5 are skilled trades. So the issues that we're dealing with do not necessarily just relate to the professional services, although a large part of it is, but it goes right across the different skill sets. Another thing is customer choice. Customer choice is not just people who purchase from us or the end users of our products or services, but people who are actually engaged in what we do. You know, in education, our students are our customers, because the demands in terms of what they expect from an educational institute is not just about learning. It's not about getting appropriate qualifications, but in many cases is, am I being prepared to be able to earn a certain income? How is my employability going to be getting professional qualifications from the organization? So the level of sophistication is becoming more and more complex. We're also being compared in a global village. So we're not being compared by our peer group in Malaysia. We're also being compared across different countries in the world. We talked a lot about technology and how that's driving change. The level of compression in terms of innovation is becoming extremely fast. And just to give you a little bit of a statistic, when you look at the first million people who owned color television, it took almost 20 years for 1 million people to own color televisions. For Twitter to get their millionth subscriber, it took 3 months. And if you look at some of the emerging technologies that are happening now, the timescale is becoming far, far shorter. So we're living in an age where there is constant progress, and we have to be able to keep up with it. And then finally, individual choice. People are making choices based on them. So one size does not fit all anymore. We have to be able to develop abilities to be able to deliver a choice for the individuals and be able to produce that consistently and right across the board. We need to be able to be an employer of choice. We need to be able to appeal to the needs of a multi-generational workforce. So when we look at what are the potential changes that are going to drive, we're looking at really four key areas. Number one is things are going to get faster and skills are going to become different. So constant reskilling is not just going to be a preoccupation, it's going to be an absolute necessity for survival. And when we think about, there was a recent survey that looked at how are human beings going to remain relevant with the age of artificial intelligence, and it was boiled down to 3 traits that human beings have that give them the advantage over computers. The first is curiosity, the natural curiosity to learn and to be able to understand more. The second is the human innate nature of being able to adapt to a fast-changing environment. So human beings are very, very skilled and adept at adapting to that environment. That's going to be an important trait for us to be able to move in an age where technology is going to be far more prevalent. And then the final one is our ability to be able to connect as human beings from one to another. So far, we have a little bit of time before the artificial intelligence managed to be able to master these traits, but these are the 3 key areas that we have as human beings that will differentiate us from machines. So a key thing for us is to be able to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable in a world where the only certainty is uncertainty. So we need to be able to be more adaptable to change. We need to be able to be sufficiently agile to be able to embrace that change and maybe even foresee it and look at how we can develop and work within that. Older, younger, more mobile. In this day and age, people are working longer. The workforce, as we were talking earlier, we have 5 generations in our own workforce, so people are working longer. People are choosing to work different type of from a traditional model of a 9 to 5 to maybe flexible working. So that gives us some very interesting dynamics in terms of different age groups within the workforce that we have to engage. So it means that we have to be able to cater for our individual stakeholders in a different way. So what is going to be important to a millennial or a young person coming into the workforce is going to be maybe different to a baby boomer. So we have to be able to adapt to all of these changes while remaining true to the organizational values and the organizational direction. That makes for an extremely difficult situation to be able to manage. All of that within a very fast-moving environment where the age of communication, in the old days, when you wanted to find out what was happening across the world, you would pick up the newspaper, you would read, and the chances are by the time you've read the news, it was 2 or 3 days old. Now we're getting information real time. So there's a huge amount of information that's being communicated all of the time. Younger people are far more connected with what's happening in the world than they ever used to be. So the old days of traditional leadership that, at the top down is no longer relevant in this day and age, because very often people younger and much more junior in the organization have a lot more knowledge than they would have been, and they're far more prepared to be able to challenge the organization. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with an app called Glassdoor. Glassdoor is an area where people could go and share their thoughts about their employers. So, working on the old adage, satisfy one customer and they will tell one person, an unhappy customer will go and tell 10. In this day and age, with tools like Glassdoor, they will tell millions. So anything that happens in the workplace, anything that they're dissatisfied with, they're very, very comfortable going and sharing that with the world. It always amazes me, actually. I have 3 children, and it always amazes me how much of their life is online. And sometimes I really don't want to go online because I'm learning far more than perhaps a parent should know about what their children do outside work. But that's the reality of life today. So it's not just about, young people. Everybody is sharing their experiences online. So that connectivity, that mobility is requiring a very different way for us to be able to manage these different dynamics. Takes me on to changes at the top. As I said, I'm in the baby boomer area, the sort of older generation. And in my day, when I started work, the boss dictated what we did. And basically, the boss was the orb of all knowledge. There was no expectation in terms of challenging that. And you basically did what was asked of you. Today, modern leadership is all about encouraging and creating an environment of feedback. You want people to be able to challenge the status quo from the organization or the structure, and that's how you harness the knowledge and the talent that you have within the organization. Now, that can take most of us to pretty uncomfortable places. This is not easy to be leading an organization where you may not necessarily have all of the knowledge or be right all of the time. So the ability to be able to adapt to that kind of an environment becomes extremely important. Money, money, money. We live in a world now where people measure their net worth not just by what they know, but how much they can monetize that. And the reality is when we're competing as employers, we're not competing just with people in our own industry, not even people within our own geographical location, but we're actually competing for talent with people in different parts of the world. As I mentioned earlier, 1/3 of our workforce is virtual. They don't actually operate in an office. We have people working for our organization in Malaysia that are based in Indonesia, in Australia, in Thailand, and they're able to operate, they're able to contribute to the organization without actually physically being present. So the ability to be able to improve compensation is going to drive people's choices in the education they seek, in the type of degrees that they do, in the work that they have, and potentially the employer. The demand is also not just for what you will pay me today, but also how are you going to help me become more marketable and increase my earning potential over a period of time. So this is how young people are evaluating potential employers. So what do we need to do to be able to plan for this uncertain tomorrow? It's a scary place to be, right? When you're not sure what's going to happen, things are changing all of the time. What are some of the things that we need to be focusing on? So the first thing at the moment is skills and learnability is the new currency. Now, when we talk about learnability is not necessarily purely academic. A lot of it is experiential. And if you talk to top organizations like GE, which has been a global leader in terms of people development, 90% of the training and the development that their people get is experiential, is on-the-job training rather than the typical classroom or academic type of training. So it's our responsibility to continue to upgrade our skills, whether they're hard skills, technical knowledge, or whether they are softer skills, people management, being able to relate to people, being able to engage with multicultural organization. One of the things that we're extremely proud of at Manpower Group is that we're a multicultural organization, and multicultural in the sense that our team in Malaysia engages on a regular basis with people right across the world. They're speaking to people from South America, from Europe, from North America, from other parts of Southeast Asia. So our ability to be able to connect with other people becomes super important in terms of articulating our ideas and being able to contribute to the workforce. Being nimble, being quick. We talked an awful lot about the innate ability of human beings to be able to adapt to their environment. We're being asked to become even more nimble and being able to adapt even quicker to be able to survive all of these different changes. Now, again, this is a difficult thing to do when you've come from a traditionalist background. We have people in our workforce who were born in the 1945, 1950 era, where they were brought into an environment where the work was very, very clearly defined. Things were very, very structured in the way they work. How they're able to adapt in the current environment becomes extremely important for an organization to be able to draw on talent. Now, if you look at that from an environment like Malaysia, depending on the statistics and who you get the numbers for, we have a working population of somewhere in the region of about 18 million. We have far more demand for skills than we have supply. We have many people going out of the employment cycle, whether it's to develop families, etc. So it's really important for us to be able to re-engage older workers, people who have maybe taken a career break from work for 3, 4, 5 years. That in itself is going to increase the demands for flexibility within the work environment. The leadership has to be able to cope with the fact that you have a multi-generational workforce, multicultural, multi-dimensional, and being able to sort of harness that under one vision and one organizational objectives becomes tougher. Keep calm and hold steady. You know, at times of change like this, there are usually two ends of the pendulum. One end is to sit tight and do nothing. Wait for it to pass. Does that sound familiar to any of you? I know certainly on many occasions through my working career, I've heard people that I've worked with said, this will pass. It's a fad. Sound familiar? Well, the reality is a lot of the fads that we talked about 20 years ago in my career have now become reality. It is a fact that in the next 10 years, the top 5 jobs don't exist today. That's the rate of change. The other end is to overreact. Right, let's change everything. Let's make sure that everything is changed. And the reality is that it's somewhere in the middle between the two. The one thing that we must remain true to is the organizational culture, the organizational values, because sometimes that's the one thing that holds organizations together, is that common goal, it's that common objective, is that belief in what the organization is trying to do. Within our organization, our CEO very often talks about we do well by doing good. So we can perform well financially. We're a publicly listed company on the American Stock Exchange, and everybody knows, you know, the shareholder will have their return. But the reality is you have to balance the soul of the organization, what it is that you're trying to do with the profitability of the shareholders. And that's a difficult balance to be able to achieve in this type of environment. So a balanced perspective in terms of how you address these becomes super important in terms of balancing your financial performance, or if you're an educational institute, your ability to be able to churn out great academics while at the same time remaining true to your objectives and your values as an organization. Finally, we're making faster and faster decisions, but decisions are being made based on data. You know, in 2015, CEOs across the world were polled to ask them how many of them actually have HR data that they use to make decisions. At that time, just under a third, 29% of them said they have data that help them make decisions. In 2017, that number has gone up to 40%. So 4 out of 10 CEOs are making decisions based on data. Now, in this day and age, we're never short of data. If you look at Google, if you look at Facebook, you're constantly being bombarded by data. Organizations now can analyze productivity of individuals, how many days of leave they have, how many days sick they have, how productive they are in an environment. And we need to be able to utilize that data in a positive way to make positive decisions. But the reality is in the old days where people made emotional decisions for all of the right reasons, there is a significant shift to making very objective, very data-driven decisions. Many organizations now are focusing on HR analytics. You will hear a lot about that in terms of analyzing the patterns of people's performances, how somebody is going to perform within one department or another, you know, any seasonal changes. So this is going to be very, very important in terms of how we move forward in terms of leadership. So as I mentioned earlier, Manpower Group is an organization that is primarily involved in providing workforce solutions, and Right Management is our HR consulting arm, and they've come up with a 3P model, the 3 most important components in terms of leadership. And they are people. The most important thing in any organization is its people. Even in the manufacturing environment, or even in engineering, which is my particular background, people are absolutely the most important part. The second is purpose. Everybody goes to work other than fulfill our needs for financial compensations, but we all want to feel that the work that we do has some meaning, some purpose. And that has to permeate throughout the whole organization. It's not just about management, it's not just about leadership. Everybody in the organization needs to be absolutely focused on a common purpose, and that's really, really important. And the final P is really an outcome based on the first 2 Ps, and that's performance. So organizations that have very clear leadership, have good people who are engaged, consistently outperform any other organization. And I'm sure there are lots and lots of statistics that I can quote at you, but I'm sure you're familiar with it, that people with more engaged employees consistently outperform other organizations with less engaged employees. So this becomes very, very important. So when we drill down to the components of that, so the first thing is the traits or competencies based. So before you bring people on board to the organization, the first thing that you're looking to do is do they have the right traits to be successful in the role? Do they have the right values to fit within the culture of the organization? Because that becomes important. Now, it's important to differentiate between traits or competencies and skills. You can teach skills, but traits is how you're actually hardwired. It's the inner you as an individual. And there are 4 areas really to look for in this modern day and age. We talked about it already, really, in this adaptability, the ability to be able to adapt to change, the ability to be able to understand that change is not bad. Change is something that not only do we need to embrace, but we need to be able to be comfortable with it. The second is drive. Are you able to sustain a level of energy required that will meet with the demands of this day and age in terms of the working environment? I mean, that's really, really important. You could be very, very adaptable, but if you don't have the energy to be able to sustain that level of engagement, then it becomes extremely difficult. Third, something very close to my heart, endurance. So one of the things that I've learned to do as I've got a little bit older, I've got more into the endurance sports. I'm a triathlete. For those of you who are familiar with it, the swim, bike and run. And on a personal level, it has taught me a great deal about the physical demand on myself and how that applies to my work environment. And it's amazing the correlation between the two. Because very often now we talk about this is more of a marathon, not a sprint. But the reality in life nowadays, with technology being what it is, we're actually running a marathon at a sprint pace. So we need to be able to sustain that level of energy, we need to be able to endure this, and we need to be prepared for setbacks. We need to be able to embrace that as part of life. And then the last is brightness. You know, when we talked about differentiating human beings versus machines, it's our ability to be able to adapt to changing environments. That's one of the most significant advantages that we have over machines. Our innate ability to be able to think outside the box, to think outside clearly defined lines, and to be able to engage and rally people around that division. So from our perspective, these are 4 core competencies that are the most ideal in today and tomorrow's leadership. The reality is not many people have all of those 4 inbuilt. So an important part as a leader is to actually understand your strength and how you could bring that to bear within the organization, and to ensure that the rest of the organization, you're surrounding yourself with people who complement your blind spots. So, you know, the expectation is that we're not going to be able to hire the perfect beings every time. The reality is different organizations have different budgets, different levels of ability to attract talent. So these are really to establish a framework about some of the most desirable capabilities. The next are capabilities. Now these things are trainable. This is something that we can develop our people, that we can coach. We talked an awful lot about unleashing talent, about being able to leverage people within the organization to be able to drive the change. You know, in the old days, the boss was the one that was expected to have all of the ideas, they give all of the instructions. Today, 80% of the change that we have derived in our organization has come from within. And it's come from small working groups within the organization about people saying, we need to change this to make the organization a better place to work, to make it a better performing organization. And being able to unleash that talent, being able to provide a forum for that feedback to come through, creating a safe environment, because one of the most difficult things for people to suggest is their fear of rejection. We need to be able to create an environment where it's safe to come up with ideas, even if the idea may, in the first instance, not appear to be either relevant or that smart. We need to be able to create that idea. And that way we're actually aggregating all of the talent that's available to us within the organization. Leadership showing humility. As I said, when I was younger, and I recall some of my leaders in the past, I'm not sure that humility was a common trait. I don't know whether that's a function of where I was brought up in the UK or whether it was just the age, but the boss was always seen as infallible, in particular by the boss. You know, they know everything there is to know. I will dictate how it is. So the ability for leaders to be humble, to be able to take on board ideas from the entire organization becomes super important. dare to lead. It's sometimes very difficult, and it could be an extremely lonely place to be a leader in an organization, because there is a perception that you need to get it right every time. And sometimes it's difficult to get it right. And I remember one particular interview that was conducted with a gentleman called Colin Powell. Colin Powell was the leader of the Desert Storm 1. He was the leader of the armed forces for the American forces in Saudi Arabia at that time. And he was interviewed shortly after an event where I think there were British soldiers that were killed through friendly fire. And he was asked, how do you make sure that when you are attacking a particular location that you don't have people? How do you ensure the safety of everybody? And I thought what he said at the time was incredibly revealing, but also very courageous. And he said basically that at any given situation, in an ideal state, you want to have 100% of the data and you want to be absolutely sure. But the reality is, in that kind of a situation, you don't have all of the data and you need to make a decision. So in some cases, they're going to make a decision based on 60, 70% of the knowledge, knowing that there is an inherent risk. If you apply that to a business environment, it's pretty much the same, perhaps with a lot less dramatic results, but nevertheless it's the same. Sometimes we make decisions based on belief, based on as much data as we can gather, but at the end of the day, leadership is about leading. It's about making these difficult decisions. And that becomes super, super important when you're trying to maintain your place against fiercely tough competition within the economic environment that we find ourselves today. So daring to lead becomes very, very important. It's also inspirational for the employees. You know, people want to follow somebody who's going to dare to move the organization forward. Steady state, I think, is no longer an option for organization. Steady state, in today's terms, is stagnation. So bold decisions become part of the package. Finally, accelerate performance. Performance is a function of having the right people in place, creating the right type of an environment for them to be engaged, giving them a great sense of purpose, giving them clarity in terms of what they can do. The result then becomes inevitable. But it's absolutely clear to set those out in clearly defined measurables. You know, in almost every walk of life, even in academia, there is an expectation that you're going to have a pass rate of X%. And there is comparison between one educational institution and another because of the quality of the graduates measured by a certain number. So performance measurement in absolute terms becomes absolutely critical. And that's where we talk about the KPIs and the metrics. Having a vision by itself is simply not enough to be able to sustain an organization. There needs to be some clear measurables that will help you define where you are on that journey. How are you performing against your objectives? You know, vision without planning and without metrics is kind of a purposeless journey. So the KPIs are very, very important to make sure that that happens. And these would be both for the organization and the individual. And to share with you some of my own personal experience, within Manpower Group globally, on an annual basis, we conduct people's engagement survey. So this is an anonymous survey, so everybody gets to put their feedback very, very candidly, and this is reviewed throughout the whole organization. And one of the consistent things that came up for us was, I think I know where the company is going, I like what we're doing, but I'm not entirely sure that what I am doing, how that connects with the organization at a country level or at a global level. And for the first time in our history, we implemented what we call a balanced scorecard. So I'm not sure how familiar people are, but it's essentially a series of metrics that says, in your role, these are the things that you need to be able to achieve. If you achieve this, then you've achieved the threshold. This is what we expect you to do. If you achieve this, it's the target, it's the objective, you've hit the target, you've had a good year. If you achieve this, then you've had an exceptional year. And what we have done is we've aligned compensation with this. Now, to be perfectly honest, we thought about this for 2 years because there were a lot of people that were concerned about how that would filter within the organization. Typically, if you look at salespeople, they're usually metric. That's something very, very obvious. But when you talk about metrics for HR, that becomes a little bit strange and odd, or in many cases, to be able to put some metrics around it. So we implemented it earlier this year, and the feedback was incredible. The positivity came back, people came back to us and said, this is really good, I have a very clear sense of direction, I now understand what I do and how that dovetails to the organization. And in doing this exercise, this was not something that we just gave to HR, said, okay guys, good luck, roll that out. But we had a series of town halls and communication sessions to explain why we were moving this way, what the potential benefits are, and it was common throughout the whole organization. So every single individual, from the cleaner all the way through to the senior leadership team, have a balanced scorecard, and at least 2 components of that scorecard were organizationally driven. So we're actually bringing the whole organization together about what's important for us as a community, as an organization, what are these common things, and then we dovetailed it down to individual contributions. Now, for those scorecards, none of them had more than 5 elements, and that was for the leadership team. But for most of our mid to junior level staff, it was 3. Because working on the principle of absolute clarity, simplicity, people were very, very clear in terms of what was required and how that sort of dovetailed to the organization. So that becomes really, really important. Engagement. We hear an awful lot about engagement. We hear a lot about companies that conduct surveys, and then they take the surveys and the leadership team says, right, okay, this sounds good, so this is what we're going to do, A, B, and C. But in reality, engagement is about taking ownership from within the organization. It's having people who are stakeholders within the organization contribute to it. So for the last 5 years, all of our change management initiatives have been driven through working groups from representatives within the organization. It's not a decision that I make. These teams come up with ideas. They will present to the leadership team why we should do it, how we should do it, and in the majority of cases, we've actually implemented that. And I would say to you, all of the things that we have done in the last 3 years in Malaysia have been driven by these consultations. It's a great way to be able to unleash the talent that you have from within your organization. Less pressure on the leadership team. You just have to be comfortable with some of these findings. Maybe difficult to swallow to begin with. But the reality is most of these great ideas came from the floor, been exceptional. Your level of engagement increases dramatically because people feel that they're being heard within the organization, not just being heard, but they're actually driving part of that change. They're actually stakeholders within it. So it's not just about the management or the leadership team that's driving all of the change, we're actually driving it from within. Career. Again, I keep referring back to the old days, and forgive me for that, but that's what us older generation tend to do. But when I joined my first company, an engineering company, I'm an engineer by training, it was very much a case of dead man's shoes. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that term, but for you to be promoted, the person above you would either have to be fired or die in the job. And in those days, not many people got fired, so the only other alternative is today's age. The reality is there are only so many positions, so many leadership positions, so many places that you can promote. But the reality is you can give people opportunities to grow and develop even within their position. How amazing is that you have people who will do projects within your organization that will drive your growth, and they see personal growth. But this has to be based on a discussion, a dialogue, rather than what we as a leadership team or an HR community feel what these people need to do. That we need to have that career conversation. And then finally, at the end of the day, in this kind of an environment, the one thing that you must never lose is the soul of the organization. Because it's very, very easy to be a slave to the shareholder, focus on making more money, more profit. The organization is, higher in the stock market. And I'm sure we've all come across examples where organizations somewhere in their line, they kind of lost their purpose, lost their soul in terms of what it is that they're trying to do. It's just all about profit. It's all about money. Get more people through the door, get more customers, get more turnover. This is not sustainable. The important thing is to make sure that what you're doing is relevant, is engaging, and adds value in your community, as well as the returning of profit to the shareholders. So I'm just going to leave you with a final thought about what we call career conversations. Now, let me differentiate a career conversation with the annual appraisal. They're two different things. The purpose of an annual appraisal is to give direct feedback in whatever mode that you have for a person's performance over a period of time, whether that's an annual performance review or whether it's a review for the purpose of confirmation. That's a very different conversation. A career conversation is literally about engaging with the individual to get a better understanding of what their aspirations are, what do they want to do, where do they see themselves going. And it's really based on 6 facts, 6 things that people are looking for. The first thing is how do I fit in the organization? Does what I do, is it important to the organization? Where do I fit within that structure? And what do you expect from me? Now, as I mentioned, for us, it was a combination of different communication sessions, but the balanced scorecard helped us really lock it in. It was very, very clear from a general perspective what was expected from different roles and different functions. And this was boiled down to individuals. So, what do you expect from me? And then, of course, how am I doing? And again, how am I doing not just in the sense of, have I met my metrics? Have I met my sales quota? Have I got enough graduates out? This is more about how do I fit within the culture of the organization? Am I making a contribution to the greater good of the community that I'm part of? Then the next thing is what's next? How should I develop? What are the areas? And this is very often a conversation about a mixture between the competencies, the capability, how people are naturally hardwired, and the skills. Is how do you match those? How do you leverage things that you're naturally good at to be able to progress your career with things that you can learn to further enhance your career? How will I be recognized? There's always the financial element. We all live in the real world. We all have bills to pay. But what was interesting in recent surveys, the top most important thing for employees about how they're going to be recognized is their ability to progress. It wasn't financial. Financial was the number 3. So whilst there are realities that we need to address in terms of how we compensate and how we pay our people, one of the most important things to them is how am I going to be recognized? How am I going to progress? How am I going to grow within the organization? And then what's next for me? So I know what I'm doing now. I know what I want to be doing. So what sort of a time frame? I'm here. Do I go in this direction? Do I go in this direction? Do I go in this direction? Where is it? How are you going to help me to be able to achieve these objectives? So in summary, as the wise people say, is we live in uncertain times, whether they're political, whether they're economical, whether they are technological. The reality is there is more uncertainty today than we've ever had. So that demands a certain level of agility, emotional agility, as well as mental agility, and also the ability to be able to connect with other people. The days of assuming that we know everything are long gone. We have to work much, much harder at engaging the talent within our organizations to be able to harness that talent to move the organization forward in. Personally, as I say, and I'm in the older generation, to me this has been one of the most exciting times. And one of the most exciting parts of that is the journey of self-discovery. Because if you are genuinely going to be able to survive this Industrial Revolution 4.0, the first thing that you need to do, as a wise person told me very early in my career, is know thyself. Know what you're good at, know what you're not good at. And then the key is surround yourself with people that are better than you. Be humble in terms of your expectations of yourself, and be comfortable with the fact that the people that you're going to be bringing through may be a lot smarter than you. They may make a much bigger contribution. And the reward is absolutely incredible on a day-to-day basis. One of the things I enjoy most about what I do is that we're a services organization. So we don't make widgets. So the value that we bring to our clients, in some cases, in the initial instance, may be intangible. And sometimes it literally is that vision, that idea of what is possible that drives people. And one of the things I just wanted to share with you, so as an organization where we employ 4,000 employees in Malaysia, and a significant number of those employees are young graduates. So we've partnered with a number of educational institutions where we've taken graduates at both ends of the spectrum, the high flyers, the top 5%, and people who've maybe not been as academically strong. And we've developed them. We have a place that we proudly call an academy. Nothing on this grand scale, I have to say. But it's really a place where we help people get on the way to their career. Majority is in graduates, but we're doing more and more help for mid-career. So in the last 3 years, we've trained and we've put to work 2,000 graduates. And I'll tell you the one thing that is most rewarding in my career. When I come to work, especially when we have a new group of people coming in, the first day, the look of total fear on their faces as they come in. You can always tell it's the first day. It's this absolutely fear. And then 2, 3, 4 weeks into the program, you see an amazing transformation in people, absolute transformation. And for me, that's one of the most rewarding things that we do as an organization. And again, for all of us, this is available right on our doorsteps. We don't necessarily have to go out and train fresh graduates. The very people that we have in our organization, if we can invest in that time to develop them, you will get that in spades. And honestly, in my working career, there is no better compensation that I've ever had, financial or otherwise, than to see people so energized, so full of purpose, so full of courage, so full of enthusiasm to be able to go and drive change. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I hope I've not gone over my time. And if we have time, I'm quite happy to field any questions that you may have. Thank you very much. Thank you.